So a combination of having a distributed, indelible, and cryptographically secured digital ledger, right? And your ability to build a currency on top of that with supply and demand models that keep it relatively stable. This has been an issue, is instability, volatility of the value of these things. If you could put all that together, you have the possibility that originally got me super jazzed about all this. You have the possibility to diagram a new incentive system and to think about how you might deploy a microeconomy in a particular context using essentially cell phones. What would that look like? One of the intellectuals that I most admire right now is a woman named Kate Raworth. I hope Kate will watch at least a portion of this. She teaches at Oxford, and she wrote a book called Donut Economics, and I really recommend her TED Talk. And Donut Economics is really about an economic modeling of essentially temperance, right? Modesty in consumption. If you overshoot, you have the tragedy of the commons, right? You just absolutely run down all the natural resources. If you have a shortfall, you have poverty. And the goal is to keep all human beings within this band where they can thrive and the planet can thrive. I think right now a lot of this is magnificent theory. I believe blockchain and cryptocurrency is a tool to make it real, potentially. And the best way to do that is trial and error. So I'm talking to a number of friends who I'd like to partner with, game theorists and developers, and I'd love to have someone working at this. It'll be a foundation, I think, who worked at a central bank, and to come up with these incentive systems and to deploy them in tiny ways and learn, deploy, iterate, learn, deploy, iterate, and learn in cooperation, probably with like NGOs who have deep understanding of the communities where we would be deploying them. So taking a human-centered design approach to how we create the incentive system and then deploy it as software. So what would that look like?
Yeah.
PG&E did this before cryptocurrency or blockchain. PG&E 30, 40 years ago, if we left every light in this house on and the fridge open and just everything, right, and you had a $500 to $1,000 electric bill, they were pumped. That's standard capitalism. But they realized, like, we're going to have brownouts, we're going to have failed grids. This doesn't work. So how do we encourage moderation in consumption of electricity? And they got together with the state legislature and they came up with a system where they and their customers are incentivized to be modest in their consumption of electricity. And so now when I'm marketed by them, they're like, good for you, you used less of our product. And this is how you measure up against your neighbors. And I thought, well, this is brilliant. Like, this is a model that can be facilitated by blockchain and cryptocurrency for every good and service we can think of. You could create indelible ledgers that allow us to see and track and incentivize modest consumption.
So where does the incentive come from? If this is the case, if they say they want to program some kind of thing that incentivizes their customers to use less, how does that help them as a company?
So I've been meaning for a while to dig into the guts of how this all actually happened, and I just haven't gotten around to it. I've been too busy. But there are, just like you can short stocks and all kinds of other things, there are ways to disincentivize infinite growth economically.
Yeah, you've mentioned, you asked a question, is infinite growth and infinite creation of jobs a good thing? What do you mean by that?
Yeah. Infinite growth on a planet of finite resources ends with a bunch of absurdities. One person owns everything. We spend all our time, every waking minute, essentially shopping and buying, right? So it's not remotely sustainable or desirable. And in my experience, it's also, when everything becomes a transaction, right, you end up with social isolation, right? So I have another business that I've run for 6 years now. We've done about 200 events, all different venues, and they're mostly dinners and overnights and retreats. And we have an amazing speaker and a chef and a wine sponsor, and we come together to have a substantive conversation. And at the beginning, I try to set some expectations and ground rules. And one of them is I ask people, think right now of that one thing you're pursuing. Right? Think of that, the American adage, like, if you don't ask for it, you're not going to get it. Right? And we are the culture that's so good at maniacally pursuing our objectives. I'm like, think of that one thing. It could be a romantic partner, an investor, you want to hire someone. Really? Okay, you got that in your mind? Tonight, here, don't ask for that. Don't go after it. And when I say that and I look at how it registers emotionally in the room, everyone's like, oh, thank God. Right? I get to turn it off for a minute. We self-isolate for a number of different reasons in our culture, but a big one is if I go out, I have to pursue my thing, and I'm going to get other people pursuing their thing. There's going to be asks, and it's tiring. Mm-hmm. So,
well, I was wondering what you meant by, because you said, is exponential growth or unlimited growth a good thing? And I'm wondering economically, how does that work to pull things back, kind of back to the business owner that is incentivizing his customers to use less energy? How does that help him keep his business afloat?
We all get to live on a planet that's not going to implode and become inhospitable to human life. I read an article recently that, that's a macro thing to say, but I read an article recently about how there was this one point in the geologic record where there were like swamps at the North and South Poles. Like the North and South Poles of planet Earth were tropical. And they were surmising from that record, that geologic record, that the equator, the band of equator, was essentially completely lifeless and uninhabitable. And so, is that long-term sustainable if we don't check climate change? Probably not. From the micro level, what does that look like? I can only answer that in the sense that, I should own that I don't have depth of expertise in most of these things, but I can see so clearly that dream team that does. And so we would discuss and debate ways to incentivize this modest consumption from the small business owner all the way up to the biggest world organizations in support of remediating those three things I said were unsustainable, like the wealth polarization, the rest of it. So, but I can give a concrete example that helped me to clarify a bunch of this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm kind of a community junkie. I go to a lot of communities. Some recurrently, some only once. And I was at Summit in Eden, Utah. And I ended up in this, where, when you drop into a conversation and it's like 3 or 4 hours go by.
Yeah.
It was like that with this woman, Barbara Mertz, and Stephanie Ware, and they were from the Nature Conservancy. And so we were talking about, they're eager to try little innovative experiments. And we were talking about a little fishing village in Mexico, where that economy was dependent on the nearby fishery. And so if they want to maintain that economy in perpetuity for their own welfare, this fishery needs to be healthy. But there's always that temptation to overfish to the point where it might collapse. So how would that look if we were to experiment there? And we kind of workshopped through it. So they have people on the ground there who've been there for a while who could at least initially represent the community, and then before we deploy, we could actually go and talk, a human-centered design approach to the community before we experiment with this. And we could say, hey, we're going to give you a little bit of free money in cryptocurrency on your phones based on the health of this fishery. The healthier the fishery, the more you earn by protecting it. So we create an economic incentive there to keep this sustainable. And it's a little bit gamified. There are autonomous systems that can monitor the health of that fishery, the quantity and variety of fish. And so at any time, if they were to pull it up, they could see how the fishery was doing. And so there's a peer-to-peer, peer pressure works great. There's a peer-to-peer incentive to be like, hey, we're all in this together and we all benefit if it stays healthy. Doesn't mean we stop fishing. It just means let's make sure it stays healthy. And then the cryptocurrency starts to accumulate within the geographical bounds of that community. And we start to then create use cases for that currency. So they've started to accumulate it, and it's like traditional channel partnerships. We ask the local people, what do you buy most? And they say, oh, we buy XYZ. Great. Well, you can get a 10% discount using that cryptocurrency we've been giving you to buy cooking oil or whatever it is. And so you instantiate this little economy, and you start to grow that economy. And it's digital, it's disintermediated, it's decentralized. Notice in all of this, I have no idea how we make money. I just want these things to work, which is why I'm thinking of a foundation.
Well, because that's what I'm wondering is the incentive. What is the incentive for people to do? Because it sounds great. I mean, if there's a way for people to make money and also do good, why not? And actually, I feel like we're already seeing a shift in that as it's kind of apart from blockchain. I feel like there's been a big shift towards
impact investment funds,
right?
And all that.
Do good. Is it the do good economy? Is that how they the unofficial term for it?
Yeah, just like altruistic capitalists.
Yeah, fair trade,
conscious capitalism.
All stuff like that, which is great. So I mean, if they could also utilize something like this, I think I've heard some more specific examples I heard of that I thought were really interesting were a diamond company. Putting in their code that they will no longer work with mining companies, I guess, that exploit their workers or something like that. Yeah. And because it's in the code, it's just automatic. You don't have to.
You have So supply chain management and transparency into real time supply chain is a very common use case for blockchain technology right now. Mm-hmm. And you can use it in service of elevating workers or making sure you're not selling blood diamonds.
Right.
There's a bunch of plays in healthcare and in food in that arena as well.
Already?
Yeah. What jumps to mind? I know that my friend Christine Mosley, who I have a lot of respect for, she started a company called Full Harvest, and I know they've been hard flirting with blockchain because they're a benefit corp, they're a B Corp, and their corporate charter, the intention is to eliminate food waste, right? And so blockchain can be a really interesting way to see what's happening with food and where you can diminish waste, which is,
Do you know what they're doing?
I don't. I haven't talked. It's been too long since I talked to her, but she keeps getting these big rounds of funding, and she semes to be doing great.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
So when you have friends in the startup ecosystem who are doing great, it means you stop seeing them, ironically, because they're nose down so much of the time. But I invite people over for dinner all the time. So you're reminding me I should invite her over for dinner. Yeah.
Are you able to speak to the owner-worker dynamic that this could change?
Yeah. So for me, that's a good question. And I think the most powerful application of this, if we were to go back to Bright ID, Philip Silva's attempt to create a super rudimentary base layer of self-sovereign identity, he wants to use that to deliver UBI. So what would that mean?
UBI, Universal Basic Income.
Universal Basic Income. So you have $100. Imagine you could point, click, and send that fractionally to every breathing person on Earth. And every breathing gets 0.01 cent of that $100. Cryptocurrency and blockchain ostensibly could do that technically, right? And so it having a unique, you only get one identity online allows you. It eliminates the danger that if you have 1,000 identities, then you get 1,000 UBI, sort of allocations. So that's one of his big aspirations, is to find decentralized way to deliver UBI. He and I are aligned on the fact that we want to find use cases for these things that raise that floor on need, right? And so there's universal basic income, which is a handout. And then there's also notions around universal basic assets. Mm-hmm. So if you're a Norwegian citizen, you have the universal basic asset of the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Norway. If you live in Alaska, you already get universal basic income because there's a dividend based on oil revenue, oil taxes. So these things actually aren't unprecedented, and they've come close to passing in the past. But now we have this powerful technological mechanism to eliminate all the bureaucracy. I'm supporting a guy who's running for president named Andrew Yang. And the keystone of his policy platform is universal basic income. He's calling it the freedom dividend, or capitalism that doesn't start at zero. And he imagines automation eliminating jobs in vast swaths in the coming decade. And in order to keep American society from collapsing, because our dignity and self-esteem is very tied up in our jobs, and that needs to change, in my opinion. To keep people from freaking out, we should give them $1,000 a month per person. You're 18 to 64 and you're breathing in America, you're a citizen. Here's your $1,000.
Is that what the proposal is? Is $12,000 per person a year?
That is correct. And actually, he gave the most, and number one criticism, how are you going to pay for this? Mm-hmm. He gave the most eloquent defense of universal basic income I have ever heard on the Sam Harris podcast. I think it's episode 130.
You know the episode number.
I can't remember really simple things, but I remember stuff like this.
And what did he say to that?
I wouldn't even deign to attempt. Yeah. I'm good at, he's incredible. I mean, he's part of his policy platform is universal health care, student loan forgiveness. It's a very much a hybrid of entrepreneurship. UBI actually increases incidence of people starting businesses.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching the episode. If you're interested in contributing to the conversation and supporting the show, there's 2 easy things you can do. 1, click subscribe, and 2, visit our Patreon page where you get exclusive access to the Exploring Minds community.